A few words to my background. I'm a wildlife vet and animal production specialist. I have been teaching for 27 years wildlife health and management until my forced retirement 2 years ago. The Makerere University only allows you to teach until you reach 70 years. So now I'm full-time in Queen Elizabeth National Park, and I try to share still my experience, particularly with experiential tourists who come and who want to know what actually we are doing. So I will focus on the one hand on experiential tourism, and on the other hand how we utilize that source of not only income but also exchange of ideas to the benefit of communities. In other words, it originated from the summer schools we had with a number of partner universities, and in the end we thought we'd give it a try in the commercial sector. Although we are not tour operators, what we do is we offer our free services to the Wildlife Authority, and then the Wildlife Authority is running actually that program. I need to give you a few highlights on the context in which we operate. Uganda is a member of the East African Community, and Queen Elizabeth National Park is contiguous with the Virunga National Park, which unfortunately is by and large a paper park. And another feature is that we have extremely serious conflicts just within a few kilometers across the border. So it is still a war zone. Luckily in Uganda we have solved those problems. We had rebels in the park for many years, and that had a huge impact on the tourism. And generally speaking, we had many other problems. We are struggling with diseases like Ebola, Marburg, anthrax. Then there is the legacy of Idi Amin. In other words, we had to first and foremost deal with the reputation, with the global image of that country. It is important to understand that Queen Elizabeth National Park is quite different from most parks, because when it was gazetted in '52, there were only 4 legal fishing communities in the park, and by then the colonial administration considered it to be compatible with conservation goals. But because of the war, because of the deterioration in terms of human rights, in terms of collapse of law and order, the acquisition of assault rifles, the easy access to all sorts of poisons, and also the change in what can be done now in terms of utilizing resources in the wild. That is to say, having now a lot of chemoprophylactics that can prevent the livestock from contracting diseases from the wildlife has of course encouraged illegal invasions of those park areas. So now we have got 12 legal entities, enclaves in the park with 40,000 people legally living there, and on the immediate boundary we have another 80,000 people that are of course in dire straits still, and desperate people do desperate things. So the issue of poverty features prominently, and that is to say we need to look at how tourism could become the engine of transformation in the first place, and in the second place, see the benefits that are associated with professional wildlife utilization, both non-consumptive via tourism as well as consumptive. So I have also highlighted that because of those many conflicts, the attitude of the people in and around the park was extremely hostile. And that often resulted into serious conflicts between the wildlife authority and the local population, and prevented, of course, community conservation education and the rollout of effective community programs. So that situation prevailed until 2012. It is equally important that there's no legal provision for compensation in Uganda, in contrast to what you have learned about Kenya and Tanzania. So only in cases of losses of human lives can there be what is called compassionate compensation that covers burial costs, or when there is a serious injury, to cover hospital costs. However, there is a draft bill before Parliament, and we can't predict yet whether that situation will change. But it is important to note that when we did our postmortems and also gathered circumstantial evidence, we can safely say that until then, 2012, we lost 70% of the large carnivores due to poisoning, because those agricultural pesticides and the ones used for cattle dipping are easily available, they're very cost effective, and it's extremely difficult to pin down the culprits. So before 2012, we lost per year between 2 and 12 lions. In 27 and 8, we have an invasion of pastoralists of Ugandan origin that had illegally occupied the Uganda National Park. And since the park was before their ancestral grazing area, they thought it fit to reoccupy the park. They even started setting up homesteads, and there was actually a mini war happening there. They were fighting tooth and nail the wildlife authority, and it took almost 2 years to get them out of the park. Just to see how damaging, particularly poisoning, is, we lost within 11 months 90% of the northwestern hyena population, and also the leopards along the boundary river where those pastoralists dip and spray their cattle were all eliminated. So it is a daunting task to change the attitudes of people who don't forget that they have lost their traditional grazing areas on the one hand, and who feel the government doesn't care about them. There's no provision for any kind of compensation to really collaborate with them. So we knew quite some years ago that if there is nothing happening in terms of reversing that trend, we would lose the large carnivores. That was crystal clear. But by then we didn't have the funds, we had very few tourists, so it was difficult also to engage NGOs, because quite a few NGOs, they don't want to go into such conflict areas and where at times your life is at stake, particularly when the rumor mill is spinning and you're told, well, there are rebels in the park, so certain areas have been mined, and it becomes extremely tricky to remain on the safe side. So mitigation, prevention is really the job. Now, people respond disproportionately when it comes to losses from wildlife. If you know that people don't respond in the same way when they travel in a taxi or on a motorbike, and so many people get killed, and then people react very differently when one person gets killed by a lion or injured by a leopard, that this is primarily psychological warfare. And you need to move in immediately, whether you feel safe or not. Initially we had huge problems, and more so the rangers, because they were even at times in certain areas fearing for their lives. Then there is also the issue of to what extent have those attacks been provoked, because at times you wonder when people try to simply drive off dangerous animals. That doesn't only apply to the lions, the leopards, and occasionally the hyenas if they are bigger in numbers, but more so elephants. You have a huge problem with the crocodiles. I'm not going to talk about that, although they are large carnivores, because that is another huge complex, and it is an international problem because many Congolese come across in Lake Edward, and so do the Ugandans, and it is primarily a conflict that revolves around undersized fish nets, overfishing. Hungry crocodiles then have to go for people and the livestock when they come to the water. But luckily we had one occasion when we were alerted by the community about a leopardess, we called her later Kim, that was killing quite a few calves and goats in one particular community. We managed to get her and we radio tagged her, but I knew that she would come back, because even if you take them further away, it's a matter of time. We took her 30 kilometers into the core park area, and within 10 days she was back. But surprisingly, the community continued to tolerate her. And we used that opportunity to then track that leopardess. And another opportunity was that some goats were killed by that leopardess, and we took the tourists there. We presented that scenario, and they were happily donating the costs to replace those goats. So what the Wildlife Authority does is they charge $50 per experiential tourist, and it goes into the general pool of the Wildlife Authority. On top of that, the communities are having a resource sharing agreement with the Wildlife Authority that is 20% of the park entry fees. Unfortunately, with the decentralization of government, the corruption was also decentralized. So when the Wildlife Authority hands over the checks to the respective community leaders, often, unfortunately, that 20% doesn't reach particularly the victims of those conflicts. But it has reached now a proportion that I think the policymakers are reviewing it seriously, and hopefully it will again go directly to the communities most affected. Then we thought, based on that positive experience with the initial tourists, why can't we ask the tourists to give us $10 on top of the $50 on behalf of the community so that we could create a community conservation fund. So we are not formally but informally trustees of that fund, and we of course discuss with the community what, based on the needs assessment that we did initially in 2 studies, they feel is most important. And on the other hand, of course, high on the agenda is compensation of livestock losses. So here you have an image that was actually taken by an experiential tourist, and we can say that so far we feel it has been successful. We know that these ambivalent species that are on the one hand charismatic, that attract tourists, that can generate funds, are on the other hand extremely dangerous, creating a lot of conflicts. So in that Bermuda Triangle, we have to leverage how experiential tourism, ethnotourism and ecotourism can diffuse the conflict, and eventually by bringing the communities on that platform, they can explore opportunities of livelihood development. So that is that historic photo. You see the family that came out with us to track, among others, also that leopardess. Then on the right-hand side, you can see the community leader who had helped us with her capture and alerted us, and also alerted us to the losses of that man in the background who was very happy receiving that donation. So the point is, why should we wait any longer when there is obviously a receptive mood emerging out of such a pattern? And we thought we should do a lot more. So to summarize it, over the last 4 years, we generated for the Wildlife Authority net benefits of $125,000. We would like to see that the Wildlife Authority is rolling out a better anti-poaching program, because what we are seeing is that on the one hand we are happy that now the large carnivore population is increasing. On the other hand, we see that the prey population is decreasing. So that is an extremely serious situation. Another problem is also habitat management, because there is something in place that is called fire management, but I would rather call it mismanagement, because without fire breaks you cannot do whatever you call early burning or what have you. So we hope in negotiations with the community and the Wildlife Authority that the community also realizes that the money that is given to the Wildlife Authority is coming back in one way or another. Now, out of the $25,000 we generated with the help of experiential tourists into the community funds, we used over the last 4 years roughly $5,000 for compensation. Initially, we were only able to cover approximately 30% of the costs. But we also made the community aware that if the number of tourists increase, if we can generate more income, we shall increase the percentage. So now we have virtually reached 100%, and that makes people a lot more confident to look forward to see that really more tourists are coming. So they start considering themselves to be part and parcel of making the park more attractive by reporting when poachers from outside, especially commercial poachers, come in, and then they can help to have them arrested or lead us to the culprits. I'm also very much involved with forensic work, and that takes also a lot of my time. So the other $20,000 are going into a very broad livelihood program. We have a group of acrobats, we have women projects, we have beekeeping projects. I don't want to go into the details. But another important aspect is that we have reached 2,500 tourists. They want to go out with the researchers, and then they learn how complex wildlife conservation is. And I think that is a major benefit that is very difficult to figure out in terms of what will it do. And I think that also helps on that community platform to generate linkages that are valuable. Be it that some visitors are willing to support one of our partner schools, be it that they make a special contribution to connect power or to connect water or to donate items to a school. So we trained and equipped scouts, and we did that professionally so that they can really, with few exemptions, they can find out whether the claim is genuine, whether it happened inside the conservation area or in the enclave or outside. As I said, we are now almost at 100% of covering the loss. And we have very few problems because they know, as a vet, you can easily know the life weight, the value of the respective animals. We have done informally a number of conflict prevention trials. Like the scare lights, we tried different models, but I reached the conclusion, especially, I hope I can show you, that it doesn't work. When they're desperate, when they're very hungry, lions, leopards, hyenas don't mind. I have sentinel animals like a leopardess and large cubs. I have hyenas. I put camera traps out. I use different types of lights, and I study that. So surprisingly, the community is happy with them. So I call it a placebo because we have evidence that still there are problems. What works better is that when the dogs raise an alarm, that people go out with strong flashlights, they use trumpets, and recently we had to learn that even now warning shots are not working anymore. The lions, they just lie low in the thickets, they don't move away. So I think most of them are fast learners, and maybe it is because of that frequent interaction with all those people. Because Uganda is a densely populated country, and we have the highest fertility rate in Africa. So that might also explain that we are a lot more observed by those large carnivores, and they draw their conclusions. So the livelihood enhancement platform is a provision where we link people with the outside world. We are just 2 people on the ground on the program, and then we got funds from Disney and from Auckland Zoo to support 2 scouts, which are doing an excellent job. We only had a problem with 2 other scouts, but we can still manage with those 2 scouts to move all over the northern savanna. And then we also have community conservation education programs in partner schools. We have regular video shows and discussions with those young people. and the Scouts are also part of that. But it is important that both adults and young people in those communities clearly understand what role they play in that context of conflict genesis, because they tend to think these animals are malicious, but they can change that relationship by simply...
Sorry, I'm going to have to hurry you along a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. So, what determines conflict mitigation success? The most important is the response time. In other words, we have to move in immediately. We have hotlines. Even last night I got 2 calls, and then we also on the same day assess that loss and we pay immediately. So I think that has made a big difference. Now, the management team has to work basically 24/7, and it has to have the gadgets. They have to have good cameras, GPS, smartphones, so prompt alert of risks is critical. And then also we need to understand these conflict cascades, like here that is on the crater rim of one salt lake, and you can see in red that white boundary marker, and on the other hand you can see the cattle are very close, and we tracked the male before it was just 200 meters away. So these people need to understand that they have to settle their conflicts with the agriculturalists, and the government has to come on board. Yeah, sorry, I should have not used the dynamic presentation. So that is another Bermuda Triangle, just an example of how these conflicts happen, and that people are not aware, and that we need to alert them. In the center, there is a man who gave an interview to National Geographic in 2010, and he explained why he has to poison the lions. So he was extremely hostile, but then we managed to turn him around, and I think he's now one of our allies. Another example here, that man built a fairly good house for the goats, but he did a mistake that he didn't put enough nails in, and he didn't put them in at an angle to make sure that the lions couldn't pull out those planks. In other words, he had an excellent lighting system, solar powered, but that didn't protect him. So we are ensuring that communities are protected from those risks of losing lives, property, and promoting livelihoods. So if you have more questions, I can go into the details. I will give you the detailed presentation, and I think you can then get in touch with us. Thank you.